Hey guys, Mr. Schaefer here with you. It's time to get back into our novel that we just started. Edward Tulane, right? It's the miraculous journey of Edward Tulane. I'll probably just call it Edward for short, right? Or Eddie, or whatever we want to call him here. Um, well, so far we've read chapter one. We got introduced to this porcelain rabbit. Remember porcelain, China, same kind of thing. It's like what things are made out of. And actually, I was just looking at this. I have a little bobblehead here. This is Dwight, if you ever watched The Office, but what this is made out of is porcelain, right? It's like China. It's hard, it's very breakable. It's kind of like what dishes are made out of, right? Plates are made out of. So this is a little porcelain bobblehead I have, but remember, Edward is our 3 foot tall porcelain rabbit, right? Made of fine rabbit fur and has amazing clothes and silk suits. And he was given to our girl here, Abilene, right? For her 7th birthday, is what we learned so far, right? By her grandma Pellegrina. Um, so yeah, that's kind of all we learned so far, and we're gonna pick up on chapter two. Okay, we're actually gonna read chapter 2 and 3 today, I believe. But here's where it starts. This is the illustration for chapter 2 here. And to me, if I were to make a guess there, that's of course our guy Edward, and that's probably Abilene, right? Okay. Ready? Oh, and basically, we talk just real quick before we start. Basically, he gets to sit at the dinner table with him. He's got his little pocket watch that Abilene sets for him to know when she's coming home from school. He gets tucked in every night, sleeps in the room with Abilene, sits and looks out the window the whole entire day to wait for her to come home. So she treats him pretty, very like he's real, or like he's like unequal with her, right? And so does Pellegrina, but he wasn't too happy with Evelyn's parents. He says they're very condescending and like rude to him. So he's a very snobby. That's the word I would use, kind of for him, or uppity, or maybe just very particular about things, right? So let's get back into this. See what chapter 2 brings. And in this manner, Edward's days passed one into the other. Nothing remarkable happened. Oh, there was an occasional small domestic drama. Once, while Abilene was at school, the neighbor's dog, a male brindled boxer, inexplicably named Rosie, came into the house uninvited and unannounced, and lifted his leg on the dining room table, spraying the white tablecloth with urine. He then trotted over and sniffed Edward, and before Edward even had time to consider the implications of being sniffed by a dog, he was in Rosie's mouth, and Rosie was shaking him back and forth vigorously, growling and drooling. Fortunately, Abilene's mother walked past the dining room and witnessed Edward's suffering. "Drop it!" she shouted to Rosie, and Rosie, surprised into obedience, did what she was told. There's the brindled boxer, that brindled colored boxer, with Edward all in his mouth. Edward's silk suit was stained with drool, and his head ached for several days afterward. But it was his ego that had suffered the most damage. Abilene's mother had referred to him as "it," and she was more outraged at the dog urine on her tablecloth than she was about the indignities that Edward had suffered at the jaws of Rosie. So he's basically mad that the mom was more mad about the tablecloth than he was about Edward getting eaten up by a dog. And then there was a time that the maid, new to the Tulane household, and eager to impress her employers with her diligence, came upon Edward sitting in his chair in the dining room. "What's this bunny doing here?" she said out loud. Edward did not care at all for the word bunny. He found it derogatory in the extreme. So he doesn't like to be called a bunny. I'm guessing he wants to be called what? A rabbit or Edward Tulane. The maid bent over him and looked into his eyes. She said. She stood back up. She put her hands on her hips. I reckon you're just like every other thing in this house. Something needed to be cleaned and dusted. And so the maid vacuumed Edward Tulane. She sucked each of his long ears up in the vacuum hose. She pawed at his clothes and beat his tail. She dusted his face with brutality and efficiency. And in her zeal to clean him, she vacuumed Edward's gold pocket watch right off his lap. The watch went into the maw of the vacuum cleaner with a distressing clank that the maid did not even seem to hear. When she was done, she put the dining room chair back at the table, and uncertain about exactly where Edward belonged, she finally decided to shove him among the dolls on the shelf in Abeline's bedroom. That's right, said the maid. There you go. She left Edward on the shelf at the most awkward and inhumane angle. His nose was actually touching his knees, and he waited there, with the dolls twittering and giggling at him like a flock of demented and unfriendly birds, until Abilene came home from school and found him missing and ran from room to room calling his name. Edward! She shouted. Edward! There was no way, of course, for him to let her know where he was, no way for him to answer. He could only sit and wait. When Abilene found him, she held him close, so close that Edward could feel her heart beating, leaping almost out of her chest in agitation. Edward, she said, oh, Edward, I love you. I never want you to be away from me. The rabbit, too, was experiencing a great emotion, but it was not love. It was annoyance that he had been so mightily inconvenienced that he had to be handled by a maid as cavalierly as an inanimate object, a serving bowl, or a teapot. The only satisfaction to be had from the whole affair was that the new maid was dismissed immediately. So the maid got fired, pretty much. Edward's pocket watch was located later, deep within the bowels of the vacuum cleaner, dented, but still in working condition. It was returned to him by Abeline's father, who presented it with a mocking bow. Sir Edward, he said, your timepiece, I believe. The Rosie affair and the vacuum cleaner incident, those were the great dramas of Edward's life, until the night of Abeline's 11th birthday, when, at the dinner table, as the cake was being served, the ship was mentioned. And that says a lot about Edward here. Like, he was so upset that how dare that maid touch him, and how you cleaned me and threw me onto the shelf just like an old teapot or a dish or a bowl. So Edward doesn't get, bro, you are a doll, right? But in his mind, he was too good for such things. We're going to go to chapter 3 now. Here's what chapter 3 looks like. It looks like the dinner table there. So he said those are the only two big things that ever happened to him, right? The drama of his life, until he said the 11th birthday of Abilene. So it's like, what, 4 years later? She is called the Queen Mary, said Abeline's father, and you and your mamma and I shall sail on her all the way to London. What about Pellegrina? Said Abilene. I will not go, said Pellegrina. I will stay. Edward, of course, was not listening. He found the talk around the dinner table excruciatingly dull. In fact, He made a point of not listening if he could help it. But then Abilene did something unusual, something that forced him to pay attention. As the talk about the ship continued, Abilene reached for Edward and took him from his chair and stood him up in her lap. "And what about Edward?" she said, her voice high and uncertain. "What about him, darling?" said her mother. "Will Edward be sailing on the Queen Mary with us?" "Well, of course, if you wish, although you are getting a little old for such thing as China rabbits." "Nonsense," said Abeline's father jovially. "Who would protect Abilene if Edward was not there?" From the vantage point of Abeline's lap, Edward could see the whole table spread out before him in a way that he never could when he was seated in his own chair. He looked upon the glittering array of silverware and glasses and plates. He saw the amused and condescending looks of Abeline's parents, and then his eyes met Pellegrina's. She was looking at him, the way a hawk, hanging lazily in the air, might study a mouse on the ground. Perhaps the rabbit's fur on Edward's ears and tail, and the whiskers on his nose had some dim memory of being hunted, for a shiver went through him. "Yes," said Pellegrina without taking her eyes off of Edward. "Who would watch over Abilene if the rabbit were not there?" That night, when Abilene asked, as she did every night, if there would be a story, Pellegrina said, "Tonight, lady, there will be a story." Abilene sat up in her bed. "I think Edward needs to sit here with me," she said, "so that he can hear the story too." "I think that is best," said Pellegrina. "Yes, I think the rabbit must hear this story." Abilene picked up Edward, set him next to her in bed, and arranged the covers around him. And then she said to Pellegrina, "We're ready now." "So," said Pellegrina. She coughed. "And so the story begins with the princess." "A beautiful princess?" Abilene asked. "A very beautiful princess." "How beautiful?" "You must listen," said Pellegrina. "It's all in the story." And that's where we're going to stop. So, I hope you enjoyed this so far. And can't wait to see what Pellegrina's story is all about.